All right.
We're good.
Call to order the Board of Supervisors work session for August 17th, 2020 via Zoom. And I guess our first discussion item is the Newtown Fire Association. Mr. Dallas, you're up.
Good morning, everyone. Matt sends his apologies. He, as luck would have it, is out on a fire call over in Northampton right now. So he is preoccupied. So I will take this. If Glenn pops in, he can add anything he wants. So you'd like me to go through the letter that we sent out to everybody? Is that just entertain questions? How would you like me to proceed with this morning?
Well, why don't you give us an overview of what you've sent us, and then we could go into discussion or questions.
All right, sure. As noted, the Fire Association is planning on replacing its 2001 rescue pumper. It served the community well for quite a long time. The Fire Association established a committee a year ago to review a lot of other options, different types of trucks that are out there. They went and looked at probably 15 or 20 trucks, drove a bunch of them to try and get a sense of what the right answer is for Newtown. The committee did include Newtown Township Emergency Service personnel. We actually thanked them for all the support they did and a lot of details they helped us to piece together. We had some sticker shock after we got the truck design that we were looking for, and we started out at about $825,000. We've now dropped that price to $746,000, and Pierce offers early pay options which will end up being 3.8%, which is much better than the money we're currently earning on our investments. So by taking advantage of that, the price will be just under $718,000. So the company has supported this. They voted at their July meeting to proceed forward. Our next step was then to bring it to the township, looking to get your approval or acceptance for the Fire Association to proceed forward with this particular truck. They said we would pay $518,000 in cash and take a 2% loan out for $200,000 for the balance of that over a 15-year period.
Okay. There's no funding coming from the township, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
But we still want to do things in concert, since we have the relationship as close as it is with the township, and the fact that they have been a big part of preparing this truck. We wanted to bring this before you. This is a truck that will serve Newtown probably for easily 10 to 20 years. I fully expect emergency services will get some amount, if not a lot amount of use out of this truck also. And after the purchase of this truck, at least in my opinion, I don't see us needing another truck in Newtown for 5 to 10 years.
Very good. Chief Forsythe, you have anything to add to this? Or?
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think the decision, there's been a lot of thought put into this. We did take the study into account for some of the apparatus replacement that we're doing. Most of you know that engine 55-1 has been taken out of service and is going to be donated to the training center. And I think that with the purchase of this piece of apparatus, it'll provide the coverage that we're looking to provide for the next several years to the borough and the township.
Open it up for questions. Anyone have a question?
I have a quick one, and Glenn just answered about half of it, or maybe more than half. What's going to happen with the apparatus that we have now, the engine 45?
All right, that truck our plan is to sell that truck. We will keep the current rescue pumper until the time that we would take delivery of the new truck. And then that truck we'll put it up for sale ahead of time with a contingency that it will be available upon receipt and then once the training is complete on the new apparatus.
Great.
So we will stay with 3 main pieces of apparatus.
Because 55-1's already been decommissioned, so,
That is correct.
okay, good. And that will provide, as Glenn said, that will provide the coverage we need. The update, sounded like there's a lot of new, good new equipment, modernizing our equipment, so.
Yes, it's amazing how fast things are changing, even the last 5 years, much less the last 20 years.
I have a question. Dr. Carter's fire study in 2018 said to replace engine 55-1. So now I guess there are no plans currently to do that as well.
Well, Warren, if you don't mind, I'll answer that. I think that last year we corrected that problem, John. The career staff was using engine 55-1, and we, through the relationship with the Fire Association, we were able to start and use 2008 Pierce, 2010 Pierce, which is stationed at Station 55. So that enabled us to take engine 55-1 out of service and provide the coverage that we need with the current engine 55.
Okay, I mean, you know, you guys are the experts, so I just wanted a clarification of that. Thank you.
Right. And the other note in the study was that Dr. Card indicated 3 trucks with pumps, which we still maintain the 3 trucks with, because all of our trucks have pumps on it, including our ladder truck.
David, you have any questions? David Oxley?
No, Mr. Chairman, none. Thank you.
Any other further questions for the chief or Mr. Dallas? Okay. Guess that's it.
There's no Beer Fest this year, right?
There is no Beer Fest this year. We did apply for the state grant, hoping to get some funds back to offset the loss of that. We'll be selling T-shirts and mugs for the year the taps ran dry, just to try and make a little extra revenue there. We are still planning to proceed for it again in September of 2021.
Okay. There you go. I guess you got off easy. You're done for the day.
All right, no concerns. It's a week okay to proceed forward then?
I don't see any questions as to why not.
Very good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Item B is the ESI 5-year financial plan update. And we have Mr. Ray is here.
Yes.
Okay.
And I've also got Alex Sullivan and Julia Flanagan from the ESI staff here. Thanks to everybody. And on behalf of ESI, just letting you know that Dan Connolly left ESI to take another position with a financial management firm in New Jersey. I've been involved with the project since the beginning, so have a good understanding of what's going on. So we'll be working to finish out the project. Dan left us in good shape in terms of all the work that's been done along with our team. So we are on track. If you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen to have a deck, which I think you all should have gotten in advance.
Steve, I'll share it with everybody the way we have this set up. You wouldn't be able to do it. So
okay,
give me 1 second here and I'll take care of it.
thank you. Thanks. And so you're going to control it then, Micah, right?
Yeah, I'll just sort of scroll down. Let me know when.
Yeah, let's move on to the next slide just to give you a sense. We're going to try to move through this fairly quickly so that if there are any questions, we can do that. Just wanted to give you, kind of the quick reminder of what the overview and the scope of the STMP program was. Really 5 project steps: financial condition assessment, financial trend analysis, management audit, multi-year plan adoption, and then multi-year plan implementation. So where we are right now is we've done most of the work for the first 3. We're giving you some an idea of what is coming for part 4, and then we will be finishing up the report and then talking about implementation after that. Let's go to the next one, Micah. So far, as I said, so far today, we have done all of these things. The main difference from the beginning of the scope was obviously the COVID-19 crisis, which caused us in the middle of the project to do some short-term financial projections along with Micah and the team at the township. You know, the real impact that did not change the scope of the work we were doing. I mean, the real impact was that it took some time and it took some resources while we were doing that. No adjustment to the scope, no adjustment to the price. We felt that we're your partner in this project. It was important. Obviously, it's a big consideration as we look ahead, what happened with the COVID crisis and how recovery will happen afterwards. So it gave us a chance to really dig in deeply and move forward that way. So we've done the financial conditions and analyzed trends. We'll share some of that today. What we've been doing is analyzing the multi-year results rather than just a single year snapshot. You know, identified some of the factors leading to the current situation. You'll see a lot of that in the detailed report. We'll touch on some of that today. Looked at a near-term cash projection, as we said, as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. You've been using that. We met, had a series of meetings with department heads, supervisors, union leaders, and management as we were doing this. You're going to see, you've seen some of the interim findings. You're going to see interim findings and recommendations today to improve the financial position over the next 5 years. And we've revised the financial forecast to reflect the impacts of recommendations within. And we're going to share a couple of different scenarios that we looked at so you get a sense of where this all comes from. Okay, Micah, next. 3 big areas of recommendation that we'll discuss today. 1, introducing a real estate tax millage to the general fund budget beginning in 2021 to help diversify and broaden the base of revenues and also make up for some of the revenues that have been lost in the EIT and the trends that you've been facing. Second is exploring opportunities for cost sharing, particularly with the Newtown Borough for the fire services, but also looking at some other shared services opportunities, which would be more long-term. And then 3, adjusting some of the staffing levels to meet some of the current management needs. You've been asking your township manager to do a lot of work. There's a need for an assistant township manager, a code enforcement officer. There are some revenue opportunities that can come with that. Bringing your police force back to full operational level with 3 additional police officers. That should be accompanied by dealing with some of the comp time or overtime issues. And then the full-time fire officers to meet some of the needs that are coming around because of the challenge in getting volunteers. And also because of the initial grant that Micah and the team have applied for, which will help provide some funding and then build some transition funding into that. So let's move to the next, and we can go to the one after that. You've seen some of this, but wanted to share, you know, here are your historic revenues and expenses, and what we see from, you know, 2016 on is expenditures and transfers exceeding the revenues. You've been relying on your fund balance to cover your operations and capital transfers in every year but one since 2016. You know, a couple of the big factors in that, the Chamonix School District, not just Middletown Township, introducing an EIT, impacts on some of your out of township your non-resident EIT. The Lockheed Martin closure, again, impacting your non-resident EIT and even some of your resident EIT. Both put downward pressure on the EIT. So what you've had is relatively flat revenue growth that's not kept pace with particularly increasing capital needs. You have a general fund that's heavily reliant on earned income tax revenue with no general fund real estate tax millage. you know, overall, your operating costs have been stable. This hasn't been necessarily a cost problem, but you do have salary and health benefit costs that will continue to grow, and they're growing at a little bit faster rate than where your revenues have been growing with EIT. One thing, remember, incomes have not been growing to the level that even, say, property values have been growing. So, you know, you're not capturing some of the wealth that has been created in the community. That's part of what's behind our recommendation. Next, Micah. The impact of that has been the trend on your fund balance over the past, I mean, since 2015, 2016, you had at a high of almost 30% fund balance at the end of the year, down below 8% projected by 2020. And, you know, what we're seeing is that it's a weakening fund balance position. When we go to our projections going forward, you're going to see that we would see that going forward if no changes were taken. You know, generally, GFOA recommends a municipality maintain a fund balance no less than 2 months or 8% of general fund operating expenses. You guys have just adopted a measure to keep it at 10%. We think that's a good idea and something that's a very positive move. Next, Micah. We did, per the request at the last in-person meeting, we did do some comparisons and benchmarking in the report. There will be a full detailed section on the benchmarking of some of your neighboring communities. And what we tried to do, we're looking at communities that were similar to the township or directly adjacent. So we looked at Doylestown Township, Buckingham Township, Northampton, the borough, Upper Makefield, and Lower Makefield. When you look at that, in terms of ending fund balance as a percentage of general fund expenditures, Northampton and Lower Makefield, both lower than where you're at right now. In terms of personnel, you're kind of right in the middle of the pack, even to the lower end in terms of personnel per 1,000 residents. I mean, really in the middle of the pack. Northampton and the borough, both higher, and then Doylestown, Buckingham, and Lower Makefield lower. Some of that can always be based off of what goes on the general fund versus what's in other funds. So if you put your full-time fire officers into the fire fund instead of on the general fund, you would see a reduction in that. That always something you could consider as a different way of looking at it, but those are different things to think about, you know, in terms of how people count. It's not always, you know, one of the challenges on benchmarking is it's not apples to apples. We will explain that in the report. On what are those comparisons, but just something to keep in mind as we look at this. Next, Micah. But I mean, Micah, I guess if people have questions, you can just raise your hand and we can address them as you go. So maybe let me stop there. Well, let me finish with the benchmark and then we can take a quick stop. In terms of municipal millage rates for property tax, you know, a couple things to note. Newtown, Buckingham, and Upper Makefield, none of those three have general fund real estate millage. In terms of rates, you're very similar with Newtown and Buckingham, with Buckingham and even Upper Makefield. When you look at Doylestown and Northampton, Newtown and Lower Makefield, all have a mix of general fund and other special funds. What you have is the second lowest real estate millage of the comparison municipalities. Your increase was consistent with the average millage increases across the municipalities. We don't know what the others are going to do this year. Micah, you might have some ideas from some of your conversations. I would imagine that we'll see some increases because the EIT is capped. There's no place to grow on the EIT. So if people are looking to make up for shortfalls, the likelihood is they're going to be looking at real estate tax increases as well. Interestingly, we've seen decreases in both Upper Makefield and Buckingham in past years. We'll see whether those hold as they go forward. But they also had very high general fund balances. And, you know, and I think one of the things that we'll probably put in the recommendations, not in there yet, but I was thinking about this, is looking for your own purposes at what's a rate when your general fund balance gets to a certain level. When do you consider reducing your property taxes? You know, if you're at a 25 to 30% general fund balance, you can think about whether that's a trigger to make a decision on whether to reduce or not. We're not seeing that in the near future, but that's just something to keep in mind as when you set a minimum, also maybe set a maximum and think about where that could go. Next, Micah. The other part of this is always the base. You know, your property tax is a combination of your millage rate and your base. And one of the things to always remember in Bucks County is that your base growth is constrained to some extent by the county's lack of doing reassessment. So, you know, one of the challenges that in places like Montgomery County and Chester County, where they do regular reassessment, those communities are able to capture the growth of property value within their community without having to raise rates on a regular basis. In Bucks County, you are more hamstrung by having to raise the rate, so you don't see the growth that can happen naturally. So, for example, here, you've had 22% growth in your commercial property value. Now, a lot of that is new property value, but if any of that is off existing, so when you add new, you also see growth in existing. You would only get really credit for the new growth, not necessarily the growth on existing properties, similar with residential. And that you know, leaves you with the challenge of having to constantly look at rate increases when we go to a real estate tax. Next, Micah. Why don't any questions there before I go on the benchmarking or others?
I have a correction, I think, on your historic fund balance trend. You said that the organization GFOA generally recommends a fund balance no less than 2 months, and in parentheses you had 8%. That should be more like 17%.
17. That's right. We'll get that right. Sorry, that's a typo. I'm sorry. It's 8% each for each quarter, for each month. That's right. Thanks.
And I had a question about the I guess it was slide 11 with the assessed values. Would that also be something like the Village of Newtown? They did that complete renovation. Would that increase is that a factor in increasing the assessed value?
For new improvements, that should increase some there should be some reassessment that would come along with that.
But this may or may not be capturing that.
Might not be captured completely yet. Micah, I don't know. Do you have any comment on that?
No, well, the county hasn't reassessed the townships since
1972, I think.
Yeah, 1972. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, no county official likes to do reassessment because it's always interpreted as a tax increase. In most cases, in other counties where there is mandatory reassessment, it's been forced by the courts and by court cases in order to do that. You know, that's a political decision that will need to be made. Obviously, you have new leadership in Doylestown now. I don't know what they're considering. It's not an easy decision for any county commissioner to think about. But I do think, Micah, for new improvements, those can get added on, similar to if you add an addition to your house that gets added on to your assessed value.
Yeah, correct. The assessed value would change, sort of like I'll use the Village of Newtown for just as a broad example. They will be reassessed once they're done with the development and occupied.
Correct. So that should be a fairly significant, you should see some growth with that as that goes along. And that's not necessarily captured in all of the projections that we'll have in terms of what that new assessed growth will be. Okay.
And I had one other quick question for clarification. And around I thought I heard you say around the benchmarking, there's more information around the benchmarking, more detail that will be in the final report.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. There will be if you recall the Pottstown report, there wasn't a section on benchmarking. We're going to have a full section on benchmark community comparisons. We'll probably pair that with the survey as well, which is also a new addition for this one.
Cool.
Okay.
Thanks.
Otherwise, the report that we're doing is going to have basically the outline that the Pottstown report had. I don't know if it's going to end up being 150 pages. There could be 150 pages of paper if you printed it, because we're going to have the survey in there and all of those sort of things, but that's kind of almost an appendix in terms of what, the actual surveys for the business and the citizens. So I'm hoping that it's a little bit more streamlined than 150 pages, because I know you and I and everybody don't like necessarily reading 150 pages. There'll be a good executive summary that will give you everything as well. Okay.
I have a question on the assessments.
Please.
We have a few new developments that are going to be going into the township, and they're going to be pretty costly homes, from 700,000 to maybe upwards to $1 million. How are they going to be assessed? Are they going to be assessed under the 1972 assessment table, or are they going to be assessed under a new assessment table?
They'll be assessed as new, but they always adjust the assessment rates to reflect market value. There's something called the STEB ratio, State Tax Equalization Board, which adjusts properties. The thing that happens with lack of assessment are properties like mine. I live over in Newtown Grant, okay? Properties like mine that have been here for 30 years and have appreciated typically you don't see that growth in the amount of assessed value as much as the appreciation might be.
Can that work in the opposite? Say when I live in Society Place, where condominiums, when they were assessed, they may have been assessed at a higher value than what a condominium is technically assessed at. I mean, can that work in reverse for people that maybe own condos or townhouses and so on, where they pay lesser tax based on the less amount of property that they technically own?
Well, when you're not reassessed regularly, no. You don't see that. Let's call it benefit, tax benefit of a reduced value. You will not see that. There's some level with the STEB ratio, but not really. If it was reassessed on a regular basis, that you would see a balancing. Typically under a reassessment, there will either be a goal of basically stay steady, get the assessments right, and keep your tax amount, the amount collected at the same level. So you balance out your assessed value and your rate to be at the same level, or a certain amount of growth, 2% growth or 3% growth that allows for that. Typically now, to get a reduction, you would have to go in and do an assessment appeal at the county level with the County Board of Assessments in order to reduce that.
And individuals can have that done if they feel that they're paying too high of a property tax. Is that correct? Or?
That is correct. And you'll typically see more of that with commercial, say like the Lockheed property or other things, where they go in for a reassessment on those sort of things.
Okay.
One of your risk factors post-COVID could be on the commercial side. If commercial properties lose value because of a lot of closures, might those owners go in for a reassessment? That's a question, that's a little bit longer term question. Usually that would take multi-years of vacancy in order to see something like that happen.
Well, that brings up an interesting question. You had mentioned Lockheed Martin, which was eventually taken over by KVK Tech. Maybe roughly 5 years, of which nothing has been done with that property. Basically, it doesn't even occupy any kind of workers there.
Right.
I'm just wondering, can they come and get a reassessment to decrease the value of that property?
think there wasn't there at one point, if I recall, I think there was an assessment appeal for that property, maybe even by Lockheed as they were leaving.
I think it was
I don't know if
Lockheed with
that's
the
already been
school district.
reassessed.
Yeah, it was Lockheed with the school district.
With the school district, yeah, yeah. But I'm saying in this period of time that KVK has had it and has done really nothing, you know, nothing viable with that property, can they come back and reassess it again and have it, you know, a deduction taken on the assessment?
Typically, you're not going to get that from what they do. It's going to be more on what's the market value of the property in relationship to others and what others might do with it. Your bigger challenge on that is property was originally assessed as a factory for building satellites. It's very difficult to find another satellite manufacturer to replace that property in order to get the same type of value. So, but when you look at the values that are happening with replacements of lab space on the main line and in Chester County and Montgomery County for biotech, which could be a viable type use here, there are enough viable uses for that type of property, which is a campus with zoned industrial, zoned research, those sort of things. There are opportunities. It would be hard pressed for a Board of Assessment to reduce that significantly from where it is right now. Would be my guess. I'm not an assessor, but that would be my guess, Phil.
Sure. No, yeah, thank you.
Does that help? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go on. Let's go back up to the projections, Micah. Let's go to the next slide. Oops, I'm sorry, one back. Oh wait, this one, yeah. Okay, so first on here on slide 13, what this is showing is the projections on the revenues in the dark line, the expenditures on the gray line. You had a great year in 2019 from revenues. You were seeing some growth. Obviously, 2020 is a whole different story. We then projected going forward. Basically, if you're looking at a baseline, a steady state on salaries with some of the things that were already built in for 2021, 2020 to 2021 in there in terms of growth, but also remember, you're going to see higher growth rate on some of that because you had a reduction in 2020 in terms of your expenditures. So if you go back to basically the same level, you're going to have a higher growth rate coming off of that as you go forward. On the revenue side, and Alex, correct me when I'm wrong on this, but our projection for 2021 is basically a combination of 2019 and 2020. It's an average of 2019 and 2020 was how we projected for 2021. So we're not assuming you're going to get back to 2019 levels in 2021. And then moving forward off of basically a 2% growth rate, except for 2021 to 2022, that's reflecting moving back to full recreation department revenues in 2022. So in essence, we're saying that you're still going to be impacted by the crisis in 2021 as you ramp back up, but you probably won't get back to full operating level, particularly with your recreation department activities, and then going straight forward. Most of our baseline projections are looking at past trends. So this is, if everything continued the way you have, here's where you would be going as you go forward. And what you see here is a growing spread between the revenues and the expenditures. And that's, you know, when we move to the next slide.
Can I just ask a question?
Please.
I'm still a little confused on this. The expenditure curve, I mean, looks like it's straight up there. And looking back between 2015 and 2018, that curve was flat. Is this an upward trend that you're projecting from 2021 to 2025 based on all the additional personnel you recommend that the township hire?
Alex?
Yeah, so this expenditure curve is essentially if you kept everything as it was in, let's say, the beginning of 2020 or the end of 2019, so discounting, you know, the COVID pandemic. If you kept everything as it's going at that point in time through 2025, these are what the expected growth rates would be. Obviously with 2020 and 2021 factoring in the COVID pandemic, but that's why it sort of evens out to this 2.9%. The reason that prior to 2020 that it's flatter is because there were differences in staffing levels and salary levels. This is if you took, your January 1, 2020 approved payroll and had that throughout every year moving
And
forward.
our growth rate for that was a 3% increase, correct?
Yes.
On
So
salaries.
the historic revenues and expenses obviously reflect real life and the fact that, people, might change positions and what have you. So the baseline is just meant to show if everything kept going as it was on January 1, 2020, here's where you would end up.
Okay, I just,
And John, one other thing, the percentages there are really just, that's the yearly percentage growth rate. The line going up and the line going on the other side are based off of the left-hand side axis, the amount, the total amount. So so what you're seeing is the growth to, over 14 million by 2025 in terms of expenditures, and growth to about 12.5 million in in revenues by 2025.
and I'm sorry, with the revenues, I know you're going to talk about how we can increase revenues later, but there were no, I don't know, do you base that on any specific ideas for increasing revenues?
For the baseline, it is basically you continue with what you have.
Okay, that's what you're showing here, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is basically, this is status quo extended.
Okay, I get it.
Okay. So if you didn't do anything, if you didn't make any changes,
All
this
right.
is what we would expect.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, Micah, maybe to the next one. The problem with those separating lines is what happens to your fund balance as you go forward. If that was to continue in that direction, this is what would happen. We don't expect that you would allow that to happen. So we will talk about what other changes there could be in order to avoid that. But without corrective action, it falls below your 10% minimum beginning in 2020, and then continues, to decline through 2025. Okay. So recommendations, your resolution requiring each year's fund balance to be at least the amount of 10% of the budgeted expenditures. That will require either new revenues or reductions in expenditures, and reduction in growth, to some extent, from the baseline projection. So our baseline expenditure projection, again, it goes across the top line there. The maximum expenditures to stay at the 10% fund balance, given the revenues that we would expect without any change, are these amounts. So and what you're seeing there is the difference that you need to make up each year, whether through new revenues or through cost containment measures off of the baseline projection. So we start everything off the baseline, and then we work off of that to make the changes as we go forward. Okay. So, we're looking at real money that we have to find in order to halt that. Okay. 5 measures that you can take, and we'll talk about cost containment, some adoption of best management practices to achieve operating efficiency. So cost containment, some of those can happen right away. Others, as we look at the best management practices, we would view those as more long-term, and those are harder for us to project. So we leave, in many cases, will not project hard on that. We will let, those would be added bonuses as you go on. Revenue enhancement, there's 2 different ways of revenue enhancement. One is through new taxes, other is through base growth. and we'll talk a little bit about that in both cases. Implementation of the long-term economic development strategy, that's a part of the base growth strategy of how do you grow your base, how do you get more assessed value, how do you get more folks working in the township in order to do that. And then finally, pursuit of intergovernmental cost-sharing strategies. As a township that has invested well in police and fire and emergency services, and has benefited in some cases from already doing some shared services, are there opportunities to do more, as well as to make sure that you're getting your fair share of cost coverage through the existing services that you're already providing. So we'll talk a little bit about those as we go through. Okay, Micah. So when we look at the potential cost containment and management measures, and there's a more complete list of all the recommendations, we're hitting some of the highlights here, but at the end, one, as we looked at the police, was to control the police overtime and comp time accrual. One of your issues is a little bit of the comp time is one that's that can become a real problem, in that when you have comp time accrual, when the person takes it at retirement, they're taking it at a different salary level than whenever they actually may have gotten the comp time. So in our report, we will have some recommendations on ways to deal with that, in terms of perhaps even paying out your comp time at the end of each year, so it's within the current year, not necessarily within the, not necessarily carried over to a future year. In addition, management of these expenditures can be something that can be a significant savings, and part of that, we believe, can be managed by the addition of some of the full-time officers. If you have more full-time, you have a full complement, you should not have as much need for the comp time or overtime as you do now, and that's got to be part of the deal as you do that. Second potential cost containment and management measure is to contain salary and benefit growth rates. We don't think there's a lot of room in there, because your salary and benefits are pretty much within market, within the market, and in some cases may actually be low on some of your senior management folks. So there may need to be some adjustments to get them to the right level. Then I think it's important to continue benchmarking against your neighbors and against best practices, to make sure that you're staying within those levels over the long term, and doing that on a regular basis. That can be a part of some long-term planning processes, staffing plans, capital plans, and fleet management. Better control of long-term looks at what your needs are going to be and where your costs are going become opportunities for long-term savings as you do that. Some of those savings come about because you don't have as much turnover. You don't have other issues as that goes along. On the capital plans, it's thinking ahead to what is needed and then using the timing to get to the best deal. And then the other is regular multi-year financial updates, periodically reviewing your debt refinancing opportunities. Is there a chance to lower your interest rate? We've done that already in some cases in the township, but are doing that on a regular basis, periodically benchmarking your employee salaries and benefits. Let's move on to the next one, Micah. We did see a need for some expanded services and quality of life improvements. Personnel needs, the need for an assistant township manager and code enforcement manager almost right away. You've been running shorthanded. And with the code enforcement manager in particular, there should be some revenue opportunities from that, from increased fees. We wouldn't say you'd see that all in the first year, but over time that should happen. Similarly with the assistant township manager, it can allow staff to spend more time on economic development, whether it's Micah or the assistant township manager. And you've put a lot of burden on the township manager. It's going to be important also for continuity and long-term retention to balance that out. 3 full-time police officers in 2021. Again, we think that the wages could be partially offset by the overtime and compensatory time accrual reductions. Probably not completely, but you would see some savings on those. And then the 5 full-time firefighters, which are a part of the SAFERS grant for the first 3 years. We do see expenses that go up. You'll see in our projections going out in years 4 and 5 as that grant expires. That's when you need to be working on some of the regional cost sharing opportunities to match that up. And then implementing and regularly monitoring the 5-year capital improvement plan. And that's in particular, one of the findings that we saw out of the citizen survey were some of the complaints about the roads, in the potholes and the paving of the roads. How do you build that 5-year plan into that? Otherwise, most of your citizen survey responses were really pretty good. That was the main area of complaint. Next. On the revenue enhancement side, we've talked a little bit. We break this into 2 areas, short-term and long-term. Short-term.
Steve, I'm sorry, I was on mute. Can we go back to the previous slide because I had a question regarding.
Please, John. No problem.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
You mentioned the roads, and yes, that's a good indicator of quality of life. And I know we've had to cut back on some road repairs this year due to COVID-19.
Right.
And I'm curious as to why there's no personnel needs in here for Public Works Department.
I think we have that in our recommendations, but maybe as a longer term, adding to it over time. John?
How much time are you talking about? I mean, because that's where I get a lot of complaints. I mean, I don't know if you were ever an elected official, but
I have not been, thankfully, yet. I've worked for elected officials, but never been one. So
that's what people complain about a whole lot. And I know I've requested some things, and I have been told that because of lack of public works personnel, we can't do X or we can't do Y because they're busy mowing the grass or something like that. And so I feel that that's a department that should have more personnel because they have a lot of work to do.
And John, I think where we really address that, if you go back to the previous slide, Micah, real quickly, is on the long-term planning process on the staffing plans. So it's looking at your full complement and understanding how those additions, both future retirements and future additions can balance out on those needs. And so as you look at some of the changes that could be happening through natural attrition, those should be opportunities if you're doing long-term planning to find room in your budget to make some of those moves without necessarily adding a lot to the bottom line, because you're getting people maybe even at a beginning stage in their career with the township versus at an ending stage, other things like that.
But in terms of the police, this short-term need for 3 additional officers, I'm just.
We looked at both, John, we looked at both part-time and full-time and decided that the full-time, the turnover and the challenges of kind of ongoing replacement on the part-time and as well as some of the limitations within your labor agreements make it a little difficult to do part-time on the police officers versus the full-time.
I wasn't suggesting part-time. I don't think we have any part-time police officers.
We don't. That was one of let me put it this way. That was one of the things we looked at as different ways of solving some of that problem. We saw the need for particularly as you're looking at future retirements in your police department, that there's a need you're both understaffed right now on the police side, and
how much understaffed are we, and how do you benchmark that?
I would have to look at that report, John. I'm sorry, I don't have it right at my fingertips on that, but it will be a part of our report.
Well, because what I was thinking was instead of all 3 in 2021, you could spread that out a little bit depending upon how short-staffed we are.
Yeah, we did look at both of those, and that's obviously something you can do as you decide how to manage the finances.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Steve, I don't know if this is going to get further into your report, but in regards to the police department and additional officers, have you done any study about a what I'll call intermunicipality policing? In other words, like how we've done with Ricetown Township, and have you done any kind of study of us doing the same with Newtown Borough? Since I'm sure the borough's main expenses is their police department, like any other municipality. And if we were to absorb, not, I won't, a bad word is to say absorb, but if we were to merge with the borough and they paid us to patrol, it's kind of like a win-win. They're taking an expense off of their balance sheet, and we're increasing a revenue onto ours. Has that been done in your study?
We have a recommendation to do a more complete study of those opportunities and to begin the discussions of those opportunities on regionalization, both with the police and potentially with fire as well. You know, one advantage when you're a community with a pretty with both a good reputation and a kind of a built-out infrastructure of police and fire and emergency services, and your neighboring communities may not be as completely built out, that's something that's important. Again, I'll go to maybe John's comment as an elected official. You know, earlier, I haven't been an elected official, but I know one of the things that elected officials also always think about is, you know, what's under their control. So one of the challenges here always is what's under my control, and if police aren't under my control for the borough, what will that mean for them? Usually, I think what we've seen in opportunities like that, it's paying attention and beginning the conversations now and looking for the opportunities in the future. It could be a retirement, a key retirement of a senior official that creates an opportunity where they would have to replace somebody, and then here's the opportunity to maybe make a move on that. But it's also looking at the needs as a result of COVID for everybody. You know, all communities are facing similar challenges. You know, I wouldn't just leave it at Newtown. You might be looking at like the school district as, you know, as a boundary of regional or other parts. So we do recommend as a long-term, and we kind of put it in the category of potentially either cost containment or revenue growth, of looking at regionalization of shared services. You already have shared services for your planning and zoning as a result of the jointure. Thinking about the jointure as a body that could be a regional service shed is another thing. In that case, in essence, revenues and planning follow service provision. And so thinking about those sort of things as you do it could be something to look at. So thinking about those natural bodies. So you've got three here that I would say. You raised one, the two new towns. You share borders, you share a lot of businesses, all those sort of things. Second is the school district. You all share a big tax base. You're all in the same boat. And then the third is the jointure. You're in an interesting position. You've got all three of those that already exist. Most municipalities don't. There's an opportunity to think differently about that and look for what's the best opportunity with those.
Thank you. I didn't mean to throw you off track.
Yeah, well, that just lets me shorten later. Okay.
And that discussion got to a couple of my questions. So I crossed a couple of them off. So.
Thanks. So let's go to the next one, Micah. So we did the revenue enhancements short term, diversify and expand your revenues through new general fund real estate millage in 2021. The magnitude of that millage depends on implementation of other recommendations, and we'll come to those. You know, so what level you go to. But we think even with kind of status quo, you would need to raise those taxes just to stay at the level that you want to be. Remember, we benchmark to your 10% goal as you know, making sure that we're going to stay at that 10% goal. Second, we think is, and I know Mike is having, there are some conversations going on, negotiate agreement with the borough for increased revenue from the fire services, shift this to the percentage of the fire service required by the borough in terms of personnel cost. This is, we think this is a really important opportunity and more reflect the service that's being provided. And also ultimately help support, as we're looking at it, your ability, the ability to add some of those full-time fire officers. They'll be providing service for the borough as well. So that'll be an important piece of it. Next. Long-term, economic development initiatives to help offset the shrinking non-resident EIT. We think there's an opportunity in terms of rezoning and enhancing the Newtown Business Commons. One model to look at there is what's happened in King of Prussia and the King of Prussia Business Park, where they've done some significant rezoning there, including adding in apartments, adding in hotels, other things within those communities, or condos, apartments, and hotels. There, that's, one of your big assets. A refresh and a rezone and a rethinking of that is important. Along with that, the county, and I know a little bit about this because I chaired the Economic Development Committee in the transition, the county is putting a renewed emphasis on economic development at the county level. How do you partner with those regional economic development agencies as a township? And that's an opportunity to be at the front of mind when the county is recruiting companies and businesses to come to the county. You're sitting in a good geographic location right off of I-95, close enough to New York, but also to the Route 1 business corridor and to Philadelphia to benefit from some of the challenges that some of those communities are going to face. With that, and probably in partnership with the county, do a publicity campaign targeting some new businesses to the area. We were a little concerned about the response we got on the business survey. And part of that was we don't really know that people think much about whether they're in the township or the borough, and don't really always realize that. So one of the recommendations you'll see in our recommendations is we'd ask the Economic Development Committee and the staff to meet with township businesses on a regular basis. You can use the survey as a basis for those questions, but remind them of you're here, we're here. Those business, outreach efforts can pay off in growth and can pay off in long-term retention. Remember, economic development is about really two things. It's about growth, but the thing we always forget is retention. And that's always your biggest risk, is losing a business to go someplace else. So making sure that you're touching base with them, showing your appreciation, showing your value of them, and listening to their concerns becomes an opportunity for maintaining what you have without losing them. We think that there are increased zoning and permit revenues due to the increased staff capacity. We talked about, the zoning officer, there's some fees that could be left on the table that maybe are able to be captured. Long-term, negotiate those expanded shared services agreements. We just talked about that with your neighboring communities. We did not include the long-term revenue enhancements in our projections. So when you look at the baseline, when you look at what our growth rates are, these would be on top of that, not, in addition to what we're projecting. So our revenue projections are really based off of two things: the tax increases and the money from the borough. All right, so those are the two that we're putting in as harder dollars right up front. These ones would be additional beyond that.
Steve,
okay? Because they're long-term and harder to accurately project, but if you don't count on them and you get them, that's the bonus. All right, on some of those economic development growth numbers, you don't count on them, but you get them. That's when you end up building yourself a cushion that is really valuable.
Steve, can I ask a question or two?
Please. Please.
You mentioned working with the Bucks County to help entice new businesses to town. I think some of us have been talking a lot with the Lower Bucks Chamber of Commerce, and they had several ideas how they can coordinate their efforts with enhancing, Newtown, making a place for businesses and helping us promote it.
I think that's a great idea, John.
I think the township is a member of that chamber. So Dennis, I know, has been going to a few of their meetings.
Yes.
fact, that's where Dennis and I met, I think.
Yep.
It was at a
Yep.
Lower Bucks Chamber meeting.
Yes.
I would also recommend that you actually also be a member of the Central Bucks Chamber as well, because you're kind of halfway between Lower Bucks and Central Bucks in terms of the businesses. It would not be bad to be participating with both. And a new resource, a relatively new, not new resource for the county. The county just brought the workforce development corporate, Bucks Works back into the county. And Billy Barnes, who is the workforce development director, I would recommend having her come to one of your meetings and talk about how she can be helpful in your employees getting, your employers finding employees, because she's working with folks all across the county on placing people who need work. And obviously your retailers and your restaurants and others have a constant need for hopefully as business grows again, have a constant need for employees, and they can be very helpful in accessing county resources for training on behalf of your local businesses.
Another question I had was the survey. You mentioned the business survey. I know you sent us the top line results of the resident survey, but I haven't seen the business survey.
We closed that last Friday, John, and we're in the process of finalizing the analysis of that. That will be in the report. Julia, how many folks what our biggest challenge on this was? Can you explain that, Julia?
Yes, so I believe we got 29 business operators to answer, but of those, only 13 identified as operators in Newtown Township.
Wow.
So
how many businesses are in Newtown Township?
A lot more than 13. I'd have to go back and look. We have that number in our report. So
yeah, we can share the results, but I don't think the statistics that we got will be as meaningful. We do have some open-ended responses from them, but it's very few.
Regarding open-ended responses in both the resident and business, will we be able to get a look at those in the final report, I guess?
Yes. We are actually working through the open-ended responses from the citizen survey now. We got around 550, and there's 3 open-ended responses. So we're trying to sort them first.
And you got good responses too.
I'm sorry?
You got some good responses too.
Yes, very good responses for the citizen survey.
Yeah.
So we'll share all that with you.
You saw those responses, Dennis?
No, I say the numbers of them.
Yeah.
the numbers and just my characterization, John, I think I said it earlier that in general, the responses were pretty positive other than, some classic complaints, which you probably are used to, and then others which were probably more substantive on the kind of the road conditions.
Yeah, we'll talk about those complaints in a minute. But, regarding the Economic Development Committee meeting with existing businesses, what about the Finance Committee, who was very instrumental in bringing ESI to the table here? They've been doing a lot of work and publicity and so on. We're going to hear from them in a few minutes, I guess.
Sure.
Why do you say the Economic Development Committee? Some specific reason? I thought they were more long-term. And I don't know what you mean by meeting with existing businesses. They should be
best practice communities oftentimes will have a kind of a formal business outreach strategy where you try to meet once a year with every business in the township or in the community. And our thinking was you have an economic development committee. Their job is to kind of promote the business environment in the community. From your perspective, we'd be glad to say economic development / finance committee. It could be both. I'm not wedded to that. We're just, it was an economic development recommendation. You do have that committee. We thought that was a good role for them, but you should be encouraging volunteers to meet with businesses from wherever you can find them. And I think they're an important constituency for this community because you have a diversified tax base and you need the EIT and you want to maintain that.
If I may, I know that as part of the finance committee liaison, they were beginning to look at different perspectives prospectuses. I don't know if that's the plural or not, but developing a prospectus for the township. And so that was one of the things it would overlap a little bit between these two.
So maybe it's a joint
Yeah.
effort or some other way. I mean, we'll leave that to you. Obviously, our recommendations are recommendations, and it's up to the township to determine how to fully implement them. So we could change that to volunteers and staff from the township should meet with existing businesses, and then you can determine which committee or where you want to assign that. If that's helpful.
It works.
Okay.
And I had just a quick comment and question around rezoning and enhancing business comments. Thank you for those examples, because that was one of my questions. I didn't know how to do that, but thank you for that, for those examples around that. The question that remains: did we benchmark the fees that we charge?
Julia, did we benchmark the fees?
We have not done that.
We did not do that. We can see what we can do on that.
I
Those may not be as readily available, but we'll take a quick look.
Yeah, if you could. I know
No
that
problem. No problem.
sometimes when I'm over to the township building, someone will talk about how high the fees are.
Okay.
I don't know if that's high, low, or whatever.
My guess is everybody will always say their fees are high, no matter whether they are or not, because they're always going to try to get them lower.
Yeah.
But you do want to know the comparative, so we'll take a look.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Okay, Micah, let's move to the next one. So we looked at 3 scenarios. Number 1 was maintain the current level of operations. That was the baseline that we showed you before. But how do we get it back to the 10% level? Second was hire the recommended staff members, reduce the overtime and comp time by 30% by 2023. So overtime, reducing that overtime and comp time by 30%. Scenario 3, same thing, reducing the overtime and comp time, negotiate the agreement with Newtown Borough for increased fire service compensation. So only in level 3 do we have the Newtown Borough additional compensation. 2 and 3, we have the reduced comp time. Scenario 1, we have no new staff members. So it stays basically the same, just on the same growth rate of salaries. Under scenario 1.
Steve, I have a question on scenario 3.
Yeah, please.
Because you mentioned the fire company and fire services about 3 times negotiating with the borough.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me, is there a number of costs that we as a township absorb by all the services that we give to the borough in terms of fire? I mean, I've seen this a couple times during
Alex?
slot. We've talked about it before, and I'm just curious what that number looks like if you have it.
Yeah, Alex, do you have that?
I would have to pull up the actual split. We do have it. I just don't have it right in front of me of what each locality contributes to the fire association. As far as what the borough contributes to the township specifically, it is only to cover the fire inspections that occur within the borough. And so each municipality, and again, I can get the hard numbers, contributes an amount annually to the Newtown Fire Association, but beyond that, the borough is not contributing to the calls that are made out from the township to the borough.
And it's about 20%, Micah, it's about 20% of the calls are from the borough, are in the borough?
Yeah, about 20% of our calls for the paid guys are in the borough.
So basically what we're talking about, David, is 20% of your paid salaries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, would be that difference.
For our firefighters now, forgive me, what's the number of, do we have the number of salary for our firefighters?
Alex?
I'll back into that number basically. That's all.
Again, sorry, I should have had this
Okay.
pulled up already. I
Don't worry
have
about it. Just, you can
pulled
send
up.
me an email on it. No big deal. Let's move on. I apologize. I don't want to derail Mr.
No, I apologize. I should have had that number ready. I know that the, it's all of the personnel costs, including the chief, which is in the fire fund, which is why I don't
Okay.
know the number off the top of my head, just because it comes from two different funds, but I can get
No
that.
problem. If you get it to me later, it's fine, or however.
We'll send it through Micah.
Perfect. Thank you.
And it will definitely be in the report. So
Thank you.
Will you be able to give us what we, I'm going to say what we should be charging the borough per call when we enter? Because I mean, other things to take into account, and I'm sure maybe you did, is that these firefighters that cover the borough and the township during the course of the day are paid for by taxpayer money. Once they enter into the borough, we're taking away taxpayer employees to go into the borough, and we're not compensated for that.
Right.
So we're taking, so our constituents, our taxpayers in the township are paying for these gentlemen and or ladies to go into the borough to answer a call, and we are never getting compensated for that call. So in essence, the township residents are also paying our employees to cover the borough.
correct.
And hopefully you factored in what it would be per call that we answer in the borough, that 20% mark of our paid salaried guys and gals that may go in there. Plus, we have the chief, who is a highly paid person in the township that also would have to leave the township to go to a borough call.
Correct.
And hopefully you have that broken down, because
We do.
I think the borough should be paying us for our services.
Yes, we broke it down to 20% of all salaries and the benefits that the township pays to the 8 full-time firefighters as well as the 1 fire chief.
Thank you very much.
And in the out years in 2024 and 2025, it will be also the additional 5 who are funded by the grant for the first 3 years. All right. We did include the grant funding in this for the additional salaries for the first 3 years, and then not for the last 2 years. So when you,
Let me piggyback on that also. What about when our police force has to answer a call in the borough? And the reason being is that we have much more sophisticated technology. If they were to have some sort of burglary call or some sort of, I don't know, they've had carjacking calls and so on, because we have the technology to investigate some of these crimes, our police force has to also go into the borough and provide our services to them. Has there been any kind of breakdown as to, maybe Chief Hearn could give you that, I'm not sure, but is there any kind of breakdown as to when our police also make calls into the borough?
Phil, I'd have to go back into the details of our police report to see if we had anything on that that came out of those interviews. I haven't seen it yet, but it may be in there, and let me check on that.
And it's possibly it's something that you weren't aware of, but I just wanted to.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I want to be careful about on that could be, my guess is police departments regularly kind of overlap with their neighboring jurisdictions on calls whenever there's an emergency situation. So you just may have to, it's different in terms of, there may be times when the borough police officers are also supporting the township for some reason on something as well. That would be my only caution on that one, where it's different in that the township is providing all of the paid firefighters in terms of the fire.
Well, which goes to my original statement, is that maybe the police force should be regionalized between the two, the township and the.
Agreed, and
just call it Newtown Police. It doesn't have to be. I know identity and egos go big with the police force, but if we were just to call it Newtown Area Police and be one big police force, then again we have the technology and somewhat of the expertise to handle some of the things. And you're right. Maybe a borough officer does come into the township at times, But, you know, this would where working together would be a benefit to both of us.
I think the benefit of regionalization can be that you're centralizing training costs, you're centralizing, you know, and doing that at scale, which generally is cheaper, you know, as opposed to having to design the same training course twice or have people take it twice.
Steve, a point of clarification, just to be
Please.
clear. These millages that you're recommending is additional to
Additional,
the 4.5 that we currently have.
correct.
Okay.
So it would be an additional 6.5. We put it all in the first year so that you get some of the benefits of accumulation over time. I mean, so we're not increasing it. We do think that by 2025, you may have to look at that, but we're hoping that some of the economic development initiatives have paid off and you don't have to do that. Okay, so yeah, so if you look at these three rates, we think not adding anything, you would still need to do 4.75. That's scenario one. Scenario two, if you're not able to get some reimbursement from the borough for the fire department, you're bearing some of that cost. You have a choice. You can go up to a 9% rate to get there, or you cannot provide the service. But that would probably mean reducing your fire complement, which you don't want to do either. The third scenario, you're getting the reimbursement from the borough. You have the staff members, and it's 6.5% starting out in 2021. John, back to your question, could you phase hiring in police officers? Yes, but then you might have to think about, and I know this is another part of an elected official, raising taxes in multiple years as opposed to doing it at one time and doing it once.
I don't care. I'm not running for re-election ever.
But that's just, that would be part of the factor on that equation. Okay?
Should the total millage column be relabeled to total millage increase?
Yes, we can do that.
Or,
That was
That's a good suggestion.
yes, it's total general fund millage, but it's not clearly labeled, so we can change it.
okay.
Yeah, so
Got it.
actually it should be general fund.
The general fund. Okay.
So your total,
I get it.
if we go to the next slide, this is your neighbors, and this is all in. So this is the tax burden for an average residential property value in each township, in each municipality, and somebody making $100,000 in the community, in those communities. So $100,000 is what you apply your EIT against. The gold is the municipal property tax. The blue is the school district property tax for those communities. And you know, the reason Upper Makefield is higher than Newtown on the school district is because of the higher average value of the property. So the average property value in Upper Makefield is higher, but if you move the Newtown house into Upper Makefield, that property value is going to go up likely as well. So what this is in essence a typical tax base. Newtown Township would still remain even with the increased millage, which is scenario 3, at the lowest of your comparison communities. So when we take this to the financial forecast, the blue line is what we were showing you before off of the status quo and where you were going. The gold line shows an increase back up to 17% of fund balance by 2023, and then some declines, and that's really because you now have the full cost of the additional firefighters by that period of time. So you may again have to think about adjusting revenues, but that's, you know, when you're not allowed to grow in your assessed value, if your assessed values don't grow, then you have to think about increasing rates. That's your only real choice. If you had natural growth from assessed values, that would be something different. And hopefully that's, again, another byproduct of economic development. If you rezone and reimagine the business commons, you should get new property value in that district. If you And you also should get new earned income tax because you're attracting more employees into those businesses. One risk on the EIT, just to keep in mind, is how long does Pennsbury hold out on not having an EIT, which is your risk to your non-resident EIT. I mean, basically all that's left in not having an EIT.
Hey,
So,
Steve, just a question in regards to EIT and different surrounding townships. Do you also have anything within your study that shows what are the outstanding townships that do not have an EIT and how many employees they may have within Newtown Township?
we actually have that. We have the number of employees within the township. Your biggest risk is Lower Makefield, obviously.
Right.
So think about it. It's the Pennsbury School District and a couple of small municipalities in Neshaminy are the only ones that do not have the EIT. It's what, Langhorne, Manor, Borough, and Tullytown, I think, are the two that don't have it. Tullytown, because they have the landfill, they don't have an earned income tax. I'm not sure why Langhorne, Manor, Borough doesn't, but they don't. But all the rest are basically your Pennsbury School District, municipalities, and maybe, I'm not sure, it's Morrisville. Morrisville may or may not. I'm not sure whether Morrisville has it or not. But it's really, Pennsbury is your biggest risk. It's the Pennsbury, if the Pennsbury School District adopted it, likelihood is each municipality would adopt it as well.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You've gained probably just one thing on EIT, you've probably gained a little bit during the crisis because of people like me who normally work in the city, who are now paying local EIT as opposed to Philadelphia wage tax. But you may have some refunds at the end of the year, depending on next tax year, depending on how much it was. So just something, you're probably picking up some of that right now. Okay, Micah, sorry. We've talked about most of these recommendations. You guys all have this. This is kind of a list of the various recommendations. These are the categories that we'll be covering them in. Executive and general, government, workforce, finance. You'll see some details within some of these. We've touched on most of them. I can maybe move to the next one. On the police, a couple things. We did talk about a business optimization working group. That's management and union members to help improve business processes within the police department. Formal career track training. So building kind of more of a career track. And this is kind of moving to a long-term thinking as opposed to year-to-year thinking is really where I think our big overall arching recommendation is. But Phil, you see at the top, investigate opportunities to regionalize police services as really one of our top recommendations. Emergency services, similar, embrace a more regional approach to providing fire services. Thinking about that. We think that both police and fire have talked about capital needs. Investigate the regional first before you invest in necessarily new facilities, because you don't know where you're going to need to put them if you're in more of a regional approach or what you're able to gain from the other municipalities. So if you cut an agreement with Northampton to provide fire, they have a fire department there too. So you might not need to build a new facility, or you might put it more on the border in between. So thinking about where those would go becomes a different situation. Okay, Micah, next. Public Works, one thing we did say, periodic review, John, to your point, periodic review of staff levels, plan for additional or reduced staffing as needed, depending on where that is, and explore opportunities for shared services. There's no reason to not be thinking about the borough in a similar way. Your trucks cross the borough when they're doing that. Why not provide the services in between? Parks, we think lean into and expand your recreational programming. You have opportunities with that. Incorporate your cultural and recreational assets into your economic development plan. We think sell it. You've got a good recreation department, sell it. And then we talked about most of the economic development recommendations. Let's go to the next one, Micah. Oh, before that, anything that anybody wants me to go back on the recommendations? Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question going back to slide 25. That was based on the recommended scenario.
Correct.
Scenario number
That's on
three, right?
scenario 3.
Okay.
We could show you all 3, but we just felt show this one for this one. Okay.
So Steve, you think that we can generate a lot more revenue by improving our marketing for our Parks and Rec is that during the year, or is that all focused more in the summer?
We think it's not, I'm not sure that it's as much about a lot of new revenue as much as it should be a selling point for people moving into the township.
Okay. All right.
You know, which ultimately can increase property values overall. Right now, if it's on existing houses, you don't get a lot out of that by increasing the property values. But, you know, if you ever get a change, that's an opportunity. Plus, if more people are working at home and you have good recreational, you're going to get more EIT. You know, one thing that we can't really factor into this is what the COVID shift in where people work, how that impacts Newtown over the long term. We've seen a pretty significant group of people who now are working within the township at home all the time.
Mhm.
You see it in terms of increased traffic at lunchtime in the shopping centers and all of those things, those things have changed. But over the long term, if that's a long-term shift, Newtown is very well positioned halfway between Philadelphia and most of heavy New Jersey, New York, as a place to pick up, you know, working residents who can contribute to your resident EIT in a way that maybe you haven't in the past.
We want them all to come from New Jersey, Steve.
You want them to come from New Jersey? You want jobs from Philadelphia? You know,
Well,
people,
we want to keep the whole EIT tax, and if they come from New Jersey, that's the way we can do it.
right.
So, I mean, we're also in that aspect. We're also close to the Princeton area,
Correct.
Hopewell area, which they do have some big places like Merrill Lynch and so on. Which, if we could get them to locate to Newtown, even if it's a satellite, and they're New Jersey residents, we keep all the EIT tax and don't have to split it with
Well,
anyone.
and that's something as you're considering the rezoning or replanning of the business commons is to think about what I would call satellite offices of bigger companies, where if they're having more people work from home, but they need meeting spaces, they need places to have an office outside of the home occasionally, other things like that. People have gotten used to not commuting to the level that they were before. That's an opportunity for a new town if you have the space and the types of space that would be needed for that. So as you think about that, those are the things, you know, that you want to keep in mind from an economic development perspective. Okay, let's go to any other questions on the recommendations. Here's the schedule. This is today, the 17th, the interim findings. I'm really glad we've had this conversation. I think we've hopefully gotten some of your questions answered, but also we're glad to get the input. Our goal is to give you this draft report sometime around next Monday. We anticipate a week from today to give you a draft report so that you have a good bit of time, that you really have 2 weeks to review it. We'll be available if there are questions online. You know, if you want to shoot us questions offline. The only thing we request is that you combine your responses so that we're getting one set of responses at the end of the day. You can identify it and say, hey, the finance committee thought that we needed to do this, other things, but you know, if we're getting a final recommendation from you, it's best if we get it in one format, just for our, in order to be able to turn around the final report, to revise the plan in an efficient way. We'll revise the plan by the 14th along with a draft implementation strategy. We'll deliver the plan the week of the 21st. You know, that, you know, you'll get that then, and we'll be glad to meet and discuss it. And then we expect wrapping it up by the end of the month.
Steve,
Sure.
I wanted to ask you about the schedule in terms of what we were told, that the public, not just the Board of Supervisors, the public would have 2 chances to review this and give you comments. And I don't see that happening unless can you explain or Phil?
So we had one public meeting, and then the second one would be the week of the 20th.
What public meeting are you talking about?
The one that happened, I guess it was end of last month.
That was a Zoom meeting. The public
Yeah.
was not really involved in that meeting.
But it was as I understand it, it was publicly advertised. People had the opportunity to participate.
No.
No, it was publicly advertised. It was advertised as a finance committee meeting, but it was for the specific purpose of getting feedback.
It was advertised, but the public was not invited to participate in the meeting.
In the Zoom meeting?
Yes,
Yes, they were.
they were.
Yes. The only meeting that the public is not invited to participate in the Zoom meetings is a live broadcast board meetings. That's it. All other meetings, the public is open to the public. Same with today.
I remember that being posted on the township homepage.
Yeah, but you didn't provide the how to tune into this particular meeting, did you?
Yes.
It wasn't in the public available agenda as far as I can see.
No, it's on the agenda.
Not the agenda that the public gets.
Today's meeting? Today's meeting I
On
found.
the website, it doesn't include the ID of the Zoom meeting or the password. It only says you can submit comments by email. And how could they submit comments by email to this meeting when they can't even see what they're commenting on? So, I just think the public has not had an opportunity yet to really look at this report and give you the feedback that we thought when we hired ESI that's what we were going to be able to do.
We have 2 board meetings coming up in September, right?
Yeah, it's September 23rd after the final report.
Yeah.
So that doesn't do any good for the public to make any comments before the final report. And if you're talking about August 26th, people can come in, but the live meeting we're going to have then is limited to 20 people. And as you know, there's going to be probably a lot of people attending who are interested in the Toll Brothers decision. So it's not going to be optimal, but that could be one public meeting. But
Just to clarify, the Zoom address and password are on the agenda.
For
Right on
today.
top.
Mine are at the top of the agenda, the Zoom.
Right.
yeah,
And I found it on the meetings and agendas tab under, yep.
I just looked there today. I didn't see that. All right. Well, is there any public in the participating in the meeting?
We have some people here from the finance committee, so.
We have a
consider
lot of the finance committee.
Public, yeah. Well, let's get back to our, what we were doing. Is there any more questions for Steve in regards to the report here?
I know we went through a lot of stuff, and so if you have other thoughts, don't hesitate to, either send them through Micah or send them directly to me. Either way.
So according to that schedule, when will we see you again?
I was going to work that out with Micah. We can be pretty flexible on what's the best way to do that.
Well, we're going back to live meetings, so maybe it'll be a live meeting that you can attend.
I can walk across the street, Jerry, and I mean Phil. I'm sorry. I can walk across the street and be there. So
You can pick me up on the way. I guess we'll hammer that out.
I'll be at Micah's disposal or in your disposal, and you guys let us know what you need.
Excellent. Sounds great.
Okay.
Anything further?
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate
Yes,
it.
thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank
Look forward to that almost 150 pages.
We'll make it easy to read, Dennis. Okay.
Alex, Julia,
Thanks all.
thank you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Julia,
Take care.
Alex.
Have a great day.
Take care, guys.
Okay. Moving on to the Finance Committee with the report. I guess, George, you're giving the report?
Yes.
Okay. Floor is yours.
Okay. The big agenda for us for this is really to go over the proposed communications plan, phase 1 of the communications plan. If you recall, the real purpose of the communications plan is to provide accurate financial information to the township residents, especially with the idea being that we're going to get this report, a lot of information in this report, a lot of ramifications about what recommendations the township will actually implement. So what we first proposed to the board is a plan that would have 3 phases. First phase would provide the basic financial information of the township situation. Phase 2 would highlight the significant findings of the final report, and then we could prepare or propose to prepare a phase 3 plan that would talk about and cover what the township decides to implement. And again, the thought is not to censor information, but to provide useful information in a favorable light. And by that, I mean explain why these decisions were made. So Dennis, already at one of the last meetings, you did get a draft version of a PowerPoint presentation, and then also a written implementation plan. So ideally, now would be the time to.
Here, it's on the screen. Yay.
Okay. So we've already spent a lot of time. I could go through the slideshow quickly, but ideally what I would like to see, or the committee would like to see, is the board to approve the contents of the plan, the phase 1 plan, and also approve the tasks and schedule for implementing the plan. That is, how that information would be sent out to the public or made available to the public.
George,
So,
why don't we go through this, the slide presentation? You know, we can't approve anything today.
yes, I understand that.
Okay, so why don't we just go through it, and we could put it on another future meeting for approval.
Perfect, perfect. So if we scroll through this, basically, again, it's the introduction tells us, excuse me, why we're doing this. And there's a lot of overlap. And I think one of the key things to understand also is almost all the information, I would say, that we have put in the phase 1 plan has already been made available to the public in different ways. So there really shouldn't be any truly new or surprising information contained in this phase 1 plan. So we can move on to the next. And you can see it's just a pretty straightforward background information, these first couple of slides. The Finance Committee was asked to get re-involved with things. We identified the potential to get the grant from the state. The big thing is to analyze our financial condition and come up with a 5-year plan and work with recommendations. You can do the next one. This basically just summarizes the same things that we've just heard. Next one. It's not as elegant, but it's, again, trying to put us in context of where the millage rate is for Newtown versus our surrounding communities. Next one.
And you'll note that at the bottom of that chart, it did list the 3 municipalities that do not have a earned income tax.
Okay, correct. Again, a little bit more detailed information if somebody is interested. Well, what does this really mean? A lot of people probably do not understand what a mill is or how it's designated and how that affects their actual tax rate that they get. So this was a comparison that we put together, again, to try to just give a rough introduction to people to understand what's going on. And the key one, again, one of the key points that we want to make is when people think of real estate taxes, they may think they're high, but almost all of that goes to the school with very little passing through to the township itself. And we wanted to make that very clear. Okay, next. And that's the emphasis for this slide. 81% of the property taxes typically goes to the Council Rock School District, with only 3% actually falling through to the township. So that helps to set the stage that if people think, well, I'm paying a lot of taxes, I'm paying a lot of property taxes, but there really isn't a lot of dollar amount that falls through to the township itself for all the services that we get. Next. A simple summary of where the township gets its money from based on the 2020 budget. EIT, we're obviously very dependent on EIT and also non-resident EIT. I don't think, again, that people understand that there is very little money or essentially no millage that goes into our general fund. So that's a concept that people need to be aware of. Next slide. Again, very similar to what ESI has put together, looking at the EIT revenues that we would get. You could see a major difference in 2014, 2015, when we lost the EIT from Lockheed Martin, and we've never really made up for that. In the past 5 years, it's been lost revenue that even though we do have a company that supposedly owns that property, we are not seeing any benefits in terms of hiring workers for that facility and getting EIT from that, in addition to the loss of the jobs from New Jersey, that the high-paying jobs from New Jersey that were at Lockheed Martin. Okay, next slide, please. And then here's municipal comparison. Again, we're at a very, very low EIT rate compared to other people. Next slide, please. Again, a little bit further explanation for EIT. Next slide. And this has become the famous slides or famous graphs for things now, showing that we do have a chronic budget deficit, and we're covering that by taking money from the operating fund. Next slide. Not as detailed as what ESI has presented to us, but again, provides a pretty good graphic for what's happening and how our general fund is deteriorating over time. Next slide. And then this, I believe Dennis had suggested that he has a more updated one for this based on some of the other information that we've received from ESI.
Yeah, I was just suggesting that we consider adding another line to the chart. I guess that's a row to the chart, and that we put in the projected fund balance with corrective measures. So it would just show that with corrective measures, there'd be a bigger fund balance. So I believe the number is $818,665. So I was suggesting we just consider adding a row to that chart, just to show that we, to put it in some context that we are working on it. We're not just letting this happen to ourselves.
Right. The only suggestion I would make is if you do put it in a line like that, is you'd have to asterisk it and give the underlying basis for, what's the supposition for that? What's going to change to get us to that point.
George, I have a question. If we can go back to the slide that you had where you mentioned the average salary, 118,000, and the average EIT is 1% of that.
Okay.
Yeah, this one right here.
Okay.
Actually, you would need to point out, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that half of the EIT, does half of the EIT for the people in Newtown go to the school system, I guess?
I believe it does. It's a
Yes.
0.5% for the
Yes,
school,
it's
0.5% for the township.
So you're talking about the resident EIT here, is that what you're
Correct.
talking about?
And
So
that's a very
you're-
good point. We should modify that slide to say that half of that money, that approximately $1,200, 600 goes to schools again, and only 600 falls through to the township.
Right.
So that, in general, we thought this was a pretty good overview to get everybody to a basic level of understanding the township finances, what the major issues are. And right now, I would just ask the board to make any suggested changes, like over the next couple of days or the next week. If you would make suggested changes, we can incorporate them into the slideshow. But if you're happy with this, that would be one item that we'd like to have approved on the board meeting on the 26th.
George, once it's approved, what do you intend to, where do you go from there?
That's the perfect segue. Thank you. You should have received, and I'll pay you the $20 off camera. There was a small implementation schedule that I believe that Dennis also put out. I don't know if we could pull that up, but there was a Word document. But what we're looking at is, I'll give you the rough things. Week of August 24th, post the township tax and financial facts on the township website. Also, the week of the 24th, provide a printed version of that to local print and electronic media, and then try to arrange interview with either a spokesman for the township or one of the supervisors, or if Micah, to get this information directly to the press. And then the week of the 30th, try to set up again interviews, 1 or 2 interviews for somebody to meet with the local media to get the information out. Later that week or the following week, write a guest editorial, have somebody from the township or the board write a guest editorial that we could see if we can get it published in the local media. And then also email this little package of information, or post the website and look at providing the guest editorial. That information, we could send it to local business organizations, and if we have some homeowners association contact information, but try to get it spread as widely as possible. So those are the thoughts right now in terms of trying to get this information out to the public as quickly as possible in a relatively inexpensive way. If you'd like to see more detail, we would still need the feedback from the board in terms of who you would recommend. If you wanted to do a guest editorial, the finance committee would be very happy to provide a draft document of that to somebody, then that would be finalized. If the board would like to say who they would recommend or make available for press interviews or things like that, those are the details that the finance committee would still need in terms of the implementation plan.
Okay. Yeah, these will all have to be approved by the board naturally in regards to the steps that you're talking about. Dennis, if you have that schedule, we could send it out once again to all the boards so that we all
Yes,
have.
I think it was comp plan implementation, but
Okay.
I will send it out right after the meeting.
Excellent. Any other questions for George?
So to get it straight, the finance committee will set up the meetings and do all that kind of legwork for any spokesperson with the media and so forth? Is that the
That's
plan?
correct. We recommend that that would be a good way to try to get the information out, to have somebody, an official from the township, convey this information to the public. Again, at this point, it can be done literally just to cover what's in this information, but it also could be good to kind of like set the stage. We know that the final report is going to be available at the end of August. We know that I would assume that there'll be some sort, again, a public meeting presenting the full report at that time. So we could use it to reiterate what's important so that all of our residents have a basic understanding of the finances and get an understanding of what's coming up, that there'll be some fairly significant financial discussions coming up over the next couple of months.
When is the first Board of Supervisors meeting in September? That would be after we get the final report. Michael, you know?
September, the meeting in September is the 9th and the 23rd. That's the
So-
regular board meeting.
The final report is delivered on the 21st. Is that my recollection?
Yes.
So on the 23rd, there would be the opportunity of presenting the final report to the public at a public meeting in like a live meeting, perhaps.
Correct.
And that would be a good time to alert the press, get them
Well,
embargo press releases or anything like that so they can attend the meeting.
you're saying we get the final report on the 21st of September. Is that correct?
August. You get the
August.
draft final report in August, and then you have, I believe, 2 weeks to submit comments back to ESI, and then they finalize the report and then get that to you.
George, it is September.
It's
Okay.
September, right?
September 21st for what Phil's asking.
Yeah.
The
The
final
final
report.
report, yes.
Well, that's the final report's going to be getting to the board on September 21st?
Yeah, with our comments and everything.
Okay, so we're only going to have basically one day in between to read that, absorb it, and you want to present it at a live meeting?
No, I think there should be there should be a public meeting, but it should be a couple of weeks after you receive that report.
Yeah, I wouldn't advise having a public meeting 2 days after we get the.
No, I don't either.
Okay.
And Steve is going to work that out with Micah, but I'm sure Micah will be sensitive to our need to.
Okay, so the next meeting after the 23rd would be October something.
October 14th.
14th.
Okay, so, all right. Just all this publicity then would happen around that date.
Well, we'd like to publicize the phase one as soon as possible. We know we have to wait until the August 26th board meeting for approval for that. And then we would start laying the groundwork already to do the phase 2 communications plan, which would highlight what was presented in the report. I mean, you want to take a 100-page report and boil it down to some of the most critical information. So the finance committee would start to work on that. We could actually start making an outline now based on what was presented today. We have a pretty good idea of some of the key points that are going to be made. So we could start drafting some things out among ourselves. But once the draft final report is available to the township, if we can get that fairly quickly, then we'll start working in detail on that. And then we'd have to go through the same process. The finance committee would draft the presentation and an implementation schedule, and then we would submit it to the board for approval, content approval, and implementation.
Okay, but the big news, the really, really big news is the budget. This is recommendations from ESI. They're only recommendations. What the media would like to know is the budget, things about the budget. So is that part of the plan?
Well, again, we would think that would be part of the phase 2 communications plan. This phase 1, again, the purpose behind phase 1 is to get all the residents up to speed on the background information.
The facts, yeah.
The phase 2 communications plan would be to discuss the ESI report. That would be what their findings were, what their recommendations were. And then we would propose a phase 3 communications plan, which actually describes what the township is going to implement and when, and the reasons behind that. Again, so that people would understand the entire process. They understand from phase 1 why changes have to come. Phase 2 presents the report so that everybody doesn't have to read 150 pages of the report, but they could get a pretty good understanding of what's important, what the findings were. And then the township has to make the decisions for the 2021 budget. And as part of that, they would decide what recommendations they're going to accept, which ones they're going to decline, and which ones they may be phased in. And
So
that would be the phase 3.
that'd be phase 3. Okay. Sounds good.
Now, we're just going to have to work fairly quickly, as you could see, because we have to draft it as a committee, approve it as a committee, and then get it to the board for discussion and approval. And, you know, we're working on a pretty tight schedule for, you know, phase 1 would be September. Phase 2 would ideally be October. Phase 3 would be November. But, you know, if you buy into the plan, or, you know, you may say that you'd like phase 2 and phase 3 merged together, the finance committee is open to suggestions. We're here as a tool to help you. We just see the value in complex discussions like this, that there should be a place that the public can go for simple, accurate information and a rationale behind why decisions were made in certain ways so that they understand things. We don't want to see people wildly speculate on, you know, the taxes have to go up, you know, that's a terrible thing. People need to put it in perspective of how much taxes we're paying now, where that revenue is coming from, how all those things are being changed just going forward in the future, as well as what COVID has done on top of it.
Just so everybody's clear, that the budget presentation is scheduled for October 19th.
Oh, that's the first meeting, right?
That's it. No, the regular meetings of the board in October are the 14th and 28th, and the work session is the 19th.
So will there be something on the work session about budget?
It'll be presented at the work session.
Yeah. There's a special name for it, hanging the budget, right?
No. It's a piece.
No?
Hanging the budget comes later.
Oh, is that later? Okay.
George, I gotta say, I like what you've done. Give my friends in the finance committee a lot of credit for putting that together, staying focused. I know it's been challenging during these times and misdirections of what the focus should be, but
yes,
we would definitely really appreciate all the hard work that everyone's putting on from the board on this. And I missed one part of it. Will this be on the township website as well?
Yes, that would
Okay.
be that would be the most immediate thing. Is once the
Okay.
content is approved, it should be a very quick matter to get it put on the township website.
Okay,
Right.
I'm okay with it. So
Any further?
Thank you for the
We're not voting for it.
comments. I'll pass those along to all the committee members. We've got 3 of them, you know, 3 people.
Any further questions for George?
I just want to say thank you and thanks for the flexibility. I know we've all been playing with dates and everything, and you know, kind of the way things work out. And I just want to mention too. Well, Peg, I know Peg's on the call, and she was instrumental in getting finding the grant opportunity from the state for the economic development for ESI. So I wanted to thank her.
And Jen did a magnificent job putting the PowerPoint presentation together. If you look at what it started with, what Mark primarily did with a little bit of input from me, it's I think it's done really, really nicely, and it reflects highly on what the township can do. There is one last point that I wanted to bring up, and now it just slips my. We should also start to think. What was it now? just slipped my mind. I'll think of it in a second. Great.
Well, and I think from Micah's point of view, maybe when you get the preliminary budget, it should go to the finance committee for them to take a look at also to get some input on what the budget is going to look like. And if no further questions, George, Peg, Jen, everybody else on the
Thank you all.
finance committee, thank you very much for all your hard work. Much
Thank you,
appreciated.
Jen.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Be talking to you in the future. Thank
Okay, thanks.
you. Okay, moving right along. Micah, any public comment?
Well, there's two public comments, but they relate to the Toll Brothers development. So I'll reserve these till the meeting on the 26th.
Okay. Old business, I guess the only old business that I would like to discuss, well, not discuss, but just to reiterate is that we are meeting live at the next meeting on the 26th, correct? All right, so bring your masks and helmets and whatever you have to bring with you.
Can I ask, Toll Brothers has indicated it wants 3 seats at this meeting. Will that 3 seats take up from the 20 seats that are allocated to residents?
Possibly. I'm gonna try to shuffle the meeting room around to see if I can put them in a different location. That way it wouldn't. But
Why can't we put them at 2 long tables, which wouldn't interfere with the audience, so to speak?
yep, I'll have to work out the sort of logistics of that. But yes.
Is there
Like,
any,
maybe when we did the town hall, when the police chief did the town hall, some of the officers sat off to the side. Maybe that might work. It's just an idea.
Mhm.
I think we check out the long tables and they can sit across the front of us.
we'll get the long knives out too. Maybe Phil suggested things of people in the waiting area and so on. I mean, is there a possibility of having a room, another room set up where if there are any excess people where they can actually view what's going on through the Comcast or whatever, and then know when a slot opens up, as Phil suggested, somebody would ask the question and get an answer. Somebody in the waiting room then can come in. Is there any possibility of doing anything like that, Micah?
It's possible. We could use one of the community rooms down at the other end of the hallway if there's no park and rec classes that evening scheduled for those rooms. If not, I was just going to have people sort of hang out in the lobby where they could still sort of hear and then be able to enter at that point. There's some details that we still have to work out that we'll be working through. And hopefully we'll be able to put something together sort of in writing and get up on the website for just sort of simple reference, I guess you could say.
Yeah, if people are just waiting out in the foyer or whatever you call that area and want to hear it, they're going to gang up by the door, which would not enhance social distancing. So if there's another way, another room that is secure and can be used, that would be great.
I support that. I know I got a letter from a resident as well suggesting almost exactly that. And I think I passed it on to Micah before he went on vacation. So,
But we also don't want to put them into a room where they're going to be not socially distant.
right.
Well, maybe we put markers down in the.
There are markers down in the hallway.
Maybe put some more markers down.
But you're going to have more than 3 people in there. So for 3 people, you have social distancing. Also, I guess, which one of you gentlemen are going to work the door to let people in and out?
We're going to have the police, I thought, some police officer there.
Now that's overtime for people. But, well, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. And I don't know how many people are going to be showing up. So we could get 10, we could get 1,000. So
I expected more for the town hall than we got. So I don't think we even filled every chair. I don't know what correlation that has with this, but
Well, obviously, some people don't trust any public meeting and indoors. And I know I had breakfast with Mr. Oxley, and we wanted to be outside. So, you know, I understand that people may want to come, but they feel that they don't want to be inside. So I'm hopeful that there'll be enough seats.
Okay. Any other old business? How about new business? Nothing? Mr. Sander, do you have anything to say? I mean, you paid you a lot
Thank
of
you,
money to say nothing, so why don't you say something?
You've been on your best behavior.
At the board's discretion, I could miss work sessions if they're not legal issues, but
I hear you.
I'll leave that up to the board. No, I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Jerry, anything before we leave? Nothing? Okay. Well, I guess if there's nothing else, I guess it's okay for us to adjourn. So, thanks, everybody. It was a nice discussion and
Thank
some
you,
good
everyone.
reports given.
Everybody, be well.
Take care, guys.
Be well.
Take
Thanks.
care.